I decided to make a tank from the upcoming game Battlefield 2042. This was basically all we really saw of the tank. I got some screenshots here, and this is what I ended up printing out and using as reference photos. As I was doing research online about this tank, I actually found that Amazon sells a remote control tank very similar to the one that is from the game. After receiving the tank, I realized it's pretty close in shape, but it's not really all there. It's missing a lot of components. So I decided to take it apart, looking at more reference material, and cut away at it. I thought maybe there were more parts that I could use on the actual shell of it, but it turns out there was really nothing, so I ended up keeping nothing of the tank but the outer shell. I actually don't know if I should be calling it a tank. I don't really know what it is, but I'm just gonna keep calling it that. Using styrene, I went ahead and cut out the shapes for the tank, starting with the windshield. Once I had the windshield all lined up, I decided to go for the side windows. So as I'm putting on the side pieces, I'm using my pencil to mark where the different shapes of styrene are gonna go. I actually end up using super glue, using that as filler. It's a lot stronger than putty. The only downside is it takes a lot of sanding. The old classic tester's putty is what I ended up using to fill in the huge seams I have between the original body and the styrene. This is the taillight section, so I'm showing you the lens and the cover I'm going to be attaching to it. So the name of the game is sanding, a lot of sanding. It's much harder to smooth out dried super glue than it is putty. So I'm bringing out the Dremel. I do not recommend doing this as it leaves horrible gashes in your model, but I will smooth it over later with putty. So after about a day of sanding, I'm now putting on my first primer coat to see what else needs work to make sure it's absolutely smooth. Of course it wasn't, so I had to go back over about 3 times with extra putty. Now that everything's done and smoothed out, it's time to put some texture in this model. So I'm using rods of styrene and tracing kind of what I want your eye to see. Also in the rear, there's kind of this like luggage rack. Cut it out using styrene. And the front of this bash bar, pretty easy. Again, I'm just using a larger thickness of styrene rod and tracing out where it's supposed to go. It's extremely tedious, but it definitely looks the coolest when it's done. Here I'm just putting small pieces of styrene rod so that it is not touching the actual base of the model. These side vents are used from little angled pieces of styrene glued together, and then I've wrapped a styrene rod around it. As you can see, I ended up being a little short, so I ended up putting this like extended part that's not on the original model. I think it looks kind of cool, and with some greebles put in it, I think it'll look pretty awesome. Now I'm working on the bottom front part of the model. It mimics what's on top using the same kind of bash bars. There's also a fair amount of kit bashing involved. So now I'm working on these side wings, I guess you could call them. Pretty simple. I'm using black styrene, which is kind of cool because it reminds me of like the black gloves that tattoo artists wear, and those are pretty rad. This is the tedious job of putting on rivets. Just using small rods of styrene, cutting them up, gluing them, placing them on, and then sanding them to the right size. Now we're starting on these side pieces, which are very similar to the wings. Now it's time to make the top gun. Top gun is made out of pieces of resin and random parts from other model kits. Here I'm making kind of the camera part, a horrible looking tripod type deal, and the cannon was made from a piece of a Gundam, and the rest is just pieces of styrene, more Tamiya model kits. Now, what you see here is not the final version. I was just kind of seeing what it would look like to give it a radical look. I ended up toning it back down. Here I'm laying down my first coat of paint. Since this is a kind of a winter camouflage, I'm going for the darker base color first. And then applying masking tape to match the photos of camouflage that I have. This color ended up being actually a little too bright, so I ended up toning it back down with a darker gray. So a lot of people use liquid masking, which works great. A lot of people use like toothpaste or mustard even. I actually chose to use Vaseline that I had from an older tattoo that I got. And as long as you really clean it afterwards to get any of the oils off, it works great. Would you look at that? Look at that. It's looking good. So here's the final finished gun that I made, or the cannon, and the accessories. So now I'm painting the accessories and the cannon for the up top. So I'm going to be using micro LEDs for this model. I went in tinkercad.com and just simply made the 4 headlights and the top bar. Just drilling the holes for the wires to go through. Which now everything needs lenses. So I'm using clear styrene, sanding on both sides. And for the windshield, I'll be placing from the inside and painting it black on one side. Instead of just jumping right into weathering, I decided to just add a couple decals just for more realism. For weathering, I'm using white mineral spirits and some black oil.